Session 14. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome.
Welcome.
What were we talking about?
Planetary spirits evolving through the cycles of matter back to the source, and why that means we can't talk to mediums, or why mediums can't talk to dead people.
Right. Yeah, so we're in the middle of, or near the end of, a very long letter, number 18, which contains an enormous amount of really good information, although it gets pretty difficult to comprehend at times. And as we pointed out in the previous session, it isn't important to understand all of that in detail. What is important is to grasp the general concept of how this transformation progress takes place. The progress being from pure spirit down through the various levels of manifestation until we reach the very bottom, which is this dense physical existence which we have right now. And in the meantime, we've been going through cycles within cycles within cycles. That tiny spark of spirit wasn't a human being at the very beginning. It had the potential of gaining consciousness. So it had to go through millions and possibly billions of years of transformative processes in order to reach the stage at which we, as individual human units of consciousness, exist today. So the process is incredibly long, incredibly complicated, and we're not going to ever know all of the details. But what is important is to grasp the general concepts that are being taught here. And it's completely different from what Westerners were used to in 1881, as we're in right now. This is completely new. We've had the advantage of 141 years or 140 years of teaching, of this being absorbed by certain students who have made the effort to learn it themselves and to transmit some of that information. But as we learned in our last session, if you're not yet an initiate, a fairly high level of enlightenment, you're not going to be able to write about this, but you're also not going to be able to understand it properly. So that means almost all of us are not in a position to really understand this.
And that's why we want to focus on how do we get to that level rather than forcing these teachings,
right,
and trying to shove the teachings out there.
Right. So this self-transformation starts with purification of the recipient, the vehicle that we're working with. Our goal is to get in touch with our higher self through meditation and through applying in our everyday lives the principles that we've already learned, the ethics, the non-reaction, the non-attachment, the not lying, not cheating, not taking advantage of other people. This is the purification process that we can wrap our heads around.
These are the non-sexy things.
The
chains and rounds and globes are the sexy things, but that's what we can't really understand it.
It all depends on your point of view.
I know. The non-reaction, non-attachment, non-sexy.
and in itself can be sexy.
It can be. Somebody who's stable and calm in all situations, I think that's sexy.
I do too. And,
yes.
And the eventual result is that you learn siddhis. Is that not sexy?
Yes.
It's absolutely sexy.
That's a huge key point.
Yes, it is.
The more we can purify ourselves by not lying, cheating, stealing, staying calm, not letting emotions run our existence, cities develop almost just naturally as a way of evolution.
Yes.
That's something that we can all really sink our teeth into there.
And without the purification of motives, we can't be trusted. No one's going to share those secrets with us. So, yeah, it's all
Very
sexy
great.
in the end, whether it looks like it in the beginning or not. All right, so we were talking about that there are worlds of causes and worlds of effects. And we left off talking about, for example, the after-death state of an individual who is in the process of a transformative series of steps that take place. First of all, synthesizing to some extent the experiences that were had during that lifetime, but also this gestation period that KH talks about, where that individual is preparing for, first of all, a new after-death state that will come later. We'll find out that in another letter. But also for the next incarnation, setting the stage for that next incarnation. And we also learned that it is not a good idea to try to interfere with those individuals who have died. They are having their own experience that has nothing to do with those remaining on the physical planet, except for some vague memories of theirs.
But the whole spiritualist intention is to contact them.
Is to, say, hey, I need your help. I need to know you're okay. I'm worried about you. And we learned that does not help. It is absolutely harmful to their progress. So send them good thoughts, send them love, surround them with peace and light, and leave it at that. That is the best thing we can do.
It's true.
That's how you honor someone's memory. All right, so let's continue then.
The lower world of effects is the sphere of the most sensual concepts and pictures of anthropomorphic deities, the out-creations of their creators, the sensual human minds of people who have never outgrown their brute nature on earth. Interesting. If you remember that thoughts are things, that they have tenacity, coherence, and life, and that they are real entities, then the rest will be understood. Disembodied, the Creator is attracted naturally to its creations and creatures, sucked in by the maelstrom dug out by his own hands. But I must pause, for volumes would hardly suffice to explain all that has been said by me in this letter.
He's kind of jumping ahead here. At different points, and we will learn more in later letters, there is, first of all, a casting off of the lower vehicles. First, of course, the first to be cast off is the physical body. But the etheric part of that physical body still exists, and the astral part of that physical body still exists. So the first stage after death, or very soon after death, is one that we will learn is called Kamaloka, the world of desires and emotions. And it's not unlike your dream state at night when your physical body is slightly separated from your etheric and astral self. Your brain is resting, but at the same time, there is a dream sequence that takes place. And we'll find that although this isn't exactly the same, it's similar. You wouldn't disturb a person who is sleeping unless it's an absolute emergency. That doesn't help that person, and it is very jarring to them. That's the same thing if you're trying to disturb a person in the after-death state. They're going through their own process. So please be respectful of that and let them go through that necessary stage. So go ahead, because in the other letters we'll find that there are two major stages and other intermediate stages, and at all points in between those there is a loss of consciousness completely or almost completely as they go down from one stage and into the next.
The question arises, may not spirits as well as men differ in ideas? Well, if in the different spheres contradictory doctrines are propounded, these doctrines cannot contain the truth, for truth is one and cannot admit of diametrically opposed views. And pure spirits who see it as it is, with the veil of matter entirely withdrawn from it, cannot err.
So, at the level of pure spirit, everything is absolute truth. That's where the truth is comprehended. Anything below that is going to be distorted to some extent. So even at the level of the higher mental sphere, your higher self, it understands far better the true nature of things than what we can understand in our physical brain. And yet, that's our first goal, is to reach that stage, totally in touch with our higher self. And that alone opens up vast vistas and opportunities of understanding and comprehension.
Having confessed to you that I had no right to interfere with Imperator's secrets and plans, I must say that so far, however, he has proved the wisest of us. Had our policy been the same, had I, for instance, allowed you to infer and then believe, without stating anything positive myself, that I was a disembodied angel, you might have implicitly believed anything coming from me, and I would have felt less responsible for you before my guides. However, time will show what may or may not be done in that direction. The book is out, and we have to patiently wait for the results of that first serious shot at the enemy. Oh my gosh.
The enemy being the spiritualists.
When the first shock of adverse criticism is hushed, thoughtful men will read and ponder over the book, as they have never pondered over the most scientific efforts of Wallace and Crookes to reconcile modern science with spirits, and the little seed will grow and thrive.
So he mentions maybe Imperator had the right idea. Imperator, remember, he seems to know who that is. Imperator, he implies, is a very high member of the hierarchy, several stages higher than KH is, and who took it upon himself to make an experiment with Stanton Moses, giving him information because he was very receptive. And in a state of trance, he was able to have tremendous effect on him. But as soon as he came out of the trance, he would lose everything, wouldn't understand any of it. So Imperator never revealed to Stanton Moses who exactly he was. Stanton Moses just thought he was his spirit guide, and took everything he said at face value, believed it implicitly, and yet it didn't change his life. It didn't have an effect in his everyday life. So Imperator, whoever that high being is, didn't say who he was, didn't explain to him any of that. KH is saying, maybe I should have done the same with you and just tried to influence you without
Communicating directly and having conversation.
Without telling you my limitations, and let you just assume on your own that I'm this highly spiritual, knowledgeable individual, and let you make up your own conclusions whether or not they're correct. He said, time will tell, though, which one ends up being the better option. the other thing he said was his guides. So, meaning he has his superiors that he has to answer to. And remember, too, that in the very beginning, as with St. Moses, they were really hopeful that these mediums who were already sensitive and could receive messages from some source that is beyond the physical, that they would be open to receiving something that was more useful than from their spirit guides who were on the astral plane. The Mahatmas almost never operate on the astral plane. They operate on higher levels, but they were willing in the beginning to test these mediums like St. Moses and to actually help them perform phenomena sometimes. And as we found out, in St. Moses' case, it was an abject failure. And apparently they found the same thing with the others that they tried to work with. So now it appears that whereas before they were supportive of spiritualism, now they're changing their tune. It's like, okay, we tried that, it failed, but we need to let them know that they are on the wrong path. Otherwise, they're going to think that we countenance what they are continuing to do. So it put HPB in a bad position. She now looks like the enemy because, and Sinnett too, because they are trying to discredit spiritualism at this point. It puts them in a very strange position.
In the meantime, I do not forget my promises to you. As soon as installed in your sleeping chamber, I will try and... Here, 3 lines in the original letter have been completely erased, apparently by the writer thereof.
This is very curious. So remember, right near the beginning of the letters, K.H. tried to appear to him while Sinnett was asleep, and he perceived him for just a brief moment and then lost it, and then he saw him in a different room of his house just for a brief moment too, and then the whole thing evaporated. I suspect that they were going to try the same thing again because Sinnett was really upset that didn't actually go as far as he was hoping to. So who erased the lines, we don't know, whether it was the Mahachohan or whether K.H. had an afterthought and said, yeah, I better. So he did erase, somebody erased 3 lines out of the letter.
Strange. I hope to be permitted to do so much for you. Interesting. I wonder if he means permitted by his superiors or permitted by the laws of nature, since Sinnett doesn't have the clairvoyance that K.H. has.
I had 2 possible scenarios. One is his supervisors. He's and I think that's what he means. He's hoping that they will give him more permissions than he's got right now.
If for generations we have, quote, shut out the world from the knowledge of our knowledge, end quote, it is on account of its absolute unfitness.
The unfitness of those generations.
And if it still refuses to yield to evidence, then we will, at the end of this cycle, retire into solitude and our kingdom of silence once more. Wow.
Yeah, this is a warning, and not to Sinnett, but to humanity. We're making this effort, we're making this experiment, but based on the results, we'll determine whether or not we go any farther or whether we disappear as we were before. Because in the past, they didn't come out exoterically. This is an exoteric coming out to the world, so to speak.
And for our viewers, we shouldn't make any mistake that retiring into solitude and to their kingdom of silence doesn't mean they're not still working.
Not at all. It just means they're working in peace instead of with all of these stuff that is being stirred up by trying to help humanity.
They're still most definitely helping humanity just on the mental level or higher than that.
Behind the scenes where they can actually accomplish more.
More, but more subtly.
Yes.
We have offered to exhume the primeval strata of man's being and lay bare the wonderful complications of his inner self, something never to be achieved by physiology or even psychology, and demonstrate it scientifically. It is our mission to dive and bring the pearls of truth to the surface. That's cool. That's a cool analogy. Their mission is to clean and set them into scientific jewels. That is so eloquent.
And so he's talking here about anthropology. He's talking about this whole process of the evolution of humans, not just spiritually, but also physically.
And Darwin did just that.
Yes,
And
exactly.
every other scientist.
Right. So he said, we're going to make this effort. We'll see what science and humanity does with it.
And that's exactly what we were just referring to our viewers. If they are behind the scenes working, they are sending bits and pieces of help to people like Darwin, like Einstein, like whoever's open to receiving something new and making an invention or a creation.
Exactly.
They're assisting. They're not doing it all for them by no means, but they're helping.
Right.
They're helping humanity. They chose the portal at the end to stay. The portal at the end of our book. If anyone reads the last chapter of our book, they chose the way to stay around and help out humanity instead of going off to somewhere else.
So these are the instruments of the planetary spirit who set the stage, and now these beings are working on his behalf, if we call him his, on his behalf to implement those and to help humanity remember those teachings that were taught them in their infancy.
And if they refuse to touch the ill-shapen oyster shell, insisting that there cannot be any precious pearl inside, then we shall once more wash our hands of any responsibility before humankind. Wow. For countless generations, the adept has built a temple of imperishable rocks, a giant's tower of infinite thought, wherein the Titan dwelled and will still dwell alone if need be, emerging from it, but at the end of every cycle, to invite the elect of mankind to cooperate with him and help in his turn to enlighten superstitious man.
So I think this refers to a concept where the hierarchy makes a special effort at the last quarter of each century. Each century, where they specifically try to influence and work with receptive individuals and to see how much advancement has been made since the previous attempt or 100 years previous.
And we will go on in that periodical work of ours. We will not allow ourselves to be baffled in our philanthropic attempts until that day when the foundations of a new continent of thought are so firmly built that no amount of opposition by the brothers of the shadow will be found to prevail.
So now we have the idea of the brothers of the shadow.
This is the second time we've heard that now.
Yes. And we will hear it a few more times still, because we find that just as there is a spiritual hierarchy, there is, I don't know if you could even call it a hierarchy of evil, but there is
a network, maybe.
A network.
But they don't always, we talked about this briefly in the previous video, they don't always cooperate.
No, they don't. They're very selfish, each one only helping someone else achieve their aim, if in turn it helps them achieve their own selfish aim. So, yeah. But they do sometimes try to bring down and thwart the efforts of the spiritual hierarchy, because just like people on the internet, hackers, it's sometimes not even for the purpose that they're going to get something out of it. It's just They
That's
like to interfere and mess with someone who's doing something productive. Trolls, so to speak.
Terry, without Sinnott having a long background in these studies, how much of this is Sinnott even understanding?
It's hard to say at this point. The important thing is he's really trying to understand it. He's really making an effort, and that's why KH is opening up more and more to him.
I love that KH is trying, but I don't for the life of me understand why he's making it so complicated. Why doesn't he speak in a more understandable way for Sinnott to understand? That's strange.
That's a good question. And I don't have
Maybe it's
the
part of
answer
a
to
test.
that.
Maybe he wants to make it tough on purpose. Who knows?
Maybe.
But until that day of final triumph, someone has to be sacrificed, but we accept only voluntary victims.
Yeah.
Is he being literal?
Well, he's talking about all of the slings and arrows that the outer world is going to throw. HPB has already discovered this, and Alcott. And Sinnott is beginning to experience the same slings and arrows because of his book.
Of course, of course. The ungrateful task did lay her low and desolate in the ruins of misery, misapprehension, and isolation. But she will have her reward in the hereafter, for we never were ungrateful.
And he says this many times. Ungratefulness is not among our vices. They are extremely grateful for any help that they get.
As regards the adept, not one of my kind, good friend, but far higher. You might have closed your book with those lines of Alfred Lord Tennyson's, quote, wakeful dreamer. You knew him not.
So, this is very interesting. He's quoting Lord Tennyson, who at this point was the poet laureate of the United Kingdom, appointed by Queen Victoria. The poet laureate of the United Kingdom, and he was very, very popular. He was an incredible poet. But he's intimating here that Lord Tennyson was apparently somewhat visionary and psychic or receptive to the inspirations of someone much higher than himself. KH is what he's implying. We'll find out that Sinnott also was a big fan of Tennyson. Everybody in England loved his work. Not everybody, but almost everybody. And Sinnott was a big fan of his. So he knew all of his works, and we'll find out in a later letter that Sinnott must have written and said, I couldn't find that poem. Where does it come from? So that's the stage. Now, apparently the poem, they did find it later. Sinnott did. It was in a volume or a group called The Mystic or The Mystics, and was apparently written when he was quite young, probably before he was 20 years old.
Should we hear it?
Yeah.
Here's the poem. How could ye know him? Ye were yet within the narrower circle. He had well nigh reached the last, which, with a region of white flame, pure without heat, into a larger air, upburning, and an ether of black blue, investeth and ingirds all our lives.
Yes, all other lives. So
all other lives.
Whatever the level of enlightenment of this being, it engulfs everything. All other lives is what he's referring to. It almost sounds like the planetary spirit.
KH then says, I'll close. Oh, really? After how many pages of letter? Remember then on the 17th of July, and here again, 6 lines in the original have been deleted. To you will become the sublimest of realities. Farewell. Sincerely yours, KH.
Wow, that was quite the letter, wasn't it?
Yes.
This letter alone is enough for someone to ponder over and learn from for an entire lifetime. But
Indeed.
we're hoping we can not only delve deep enough into that to acquire a rudimentary knowledge of this circle of planets, this chain that he speaks of, but that we will be inspired to do the necessary groundwork so that we will, at some point, more fully comprehend it. This next letter is extremely short. Let's just go ahead and read it.
Letter number 19.
And the first word he says is thanks, and it appears that Sinnett, while he was in London, bought some things and brought them back to India, and somehow they were transported to the Mahatmas. So we'll find out later what one of his gifts was for Moria.
Wow.
But he apparently also brought something for Sinnett. I don't know
Or
what it was.
KH.
I mean, it's for KH.
Letter number 19. Thanks. No exclamation mark, just a period. The little things prove very useful, and I gratefully acknowledge them. You ought to go to Shimla. Try, in all caps. I confess to a weakness on my part to see you do so. We must patiently await the results, as I told you, of the book. The blanks are provoking and tantalizing, but we cannot go against the inevitable. And as it is always good to mend an error, I already did so by presenting the occult world to the C-'''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''
We assume that means the Chohan, the Maha Chohan.
Okay. Patience, patience. Yours ever, KH.
What a nice little letter after that very, very long letter.
Why would he not just write the word Chohan? Why C-'''"?
I'm not sure. He has written it out in other letters previous to this, so I have no idea. And maybe it means something else besides Chohan. I don't know. So that letter was received while Sinnett was in Bombay still, and that was on July 8th, 1881. We must patiently await the results, as I told you, of the book, meaning The Occult World, which had only recently been published in England. And they were getting reviews from various newspapers, some of them good, some of them not so good.
And they're waiting to see what the spiritualists will
and
say.
they're waiting for that. And obviously it's not most likely going to be the most positive reviews from the spiritualists, but yeah, we'll find that out in the next letter in our next session here. One thing I should point out is that when Sinnett returned just a few days prior to this from his vacation, his wife and 3-year-old son did not come back with him. The reason being that she was pregnant and she was having a very difficult pregnancy. And that was one of the reasons they were glad to be in England, where she could be among her family members to take care of her. And as it turned out, and I don't know at what stage, but she had a miscarriage. And I assumed that it was fairly late in the pregnancy, but I'm not certain. Anyway, she didn't recover right away. And in fact, it wasn't until the following January when she and Sinnett's son rejoined him in India. So that's just a little bit of background on that. And they only had the one son, Denny, who was not real robust in his own health. So they were always worried about him, KH, worried about his well-being. He, at one point, I think it was actually Moria, when they were in touch with Moria, suggested to Sinnott that he and his wife not feed him any meat, only vegetarian food. And he didn't say the reason for that, whether it was for health or for psychic reasons, but that was a suggestion that he made to them. Anyway, very interesting, this relationship that has developed between Sinnott and KH. One other thing, you ought to go to Shimla, try. So, remember the Anglo-Indian branch that they've been talking about for several months now? Well, it's actually going to happen. So in August, the following month, they were planning to go ahead and institute this branch in Shimla with, of all people, Mr. Hume as the president of it. And it's not going to be called the Anglo-Indian branch. It's going to be called the Eclectic branch. So yes, they are going to institute this branch, and apparently Sinnott, who lives in Allahabad, wasn't necessarily planning to be there, but KH is saying, I think it would be a good idea if you plan to be there for the beginning of this branch. And there we are.
I hope KH shows up.
I can guarantee you, well,
Not his
almost,
physical
I
body.
can't guarantee anything he does, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be there in spirit. Not physically, but he's going to be watching what's going on. All right, well, there we are. A shorter lesson, shorter presentation today, but still very good information.
All right. See you in the next video.
See you in the next video.